Hello everyone, welcome to this weekly update video for Monday the 27th of February. And what we're going to be mainly focused on today, we'll talk about a couple of ATSM events at the end and things, but we're mainly going to be focused on TFM and the decision to push the 747 development cycle back to spring and summer in favour of first officer features, and just explore the reasons why they've taken this decision, what I think about them, what the community thinks about them. So we'll kind of explore the blog post together here. So yes, they've pushed the 747 back till spring and summer, in favour of the first officer features for initially the 737. Now this is something we knew was already happening, that Jason had started work on the manual flows for the 737. Eventually the goal is to have them activate automatically if you would like that, to have SimBrief integration so that it can program the FMC. Those are all goals that are eventually gonna happen, similar to the way that the first officer can do it. Without looking at the post initially and the reasons that they've given to talk about the issues they have with first officer, do I think it's a good thing that TFM gets first officer features regardless of any other add-ons and what we think about them? Well, yes is the short answer. I think it is good. It's one less add-on that beginners will have to buy if they don't want to. It's something that will be obviously integrated into TFM, so it's just another thing that TFM will have in its arsenal here that it can do for us. And a lot of us have used first officer like add-ons for a long time to help us in getting around the aircraft and getting things set up quicker and helping us on busy VATSIM flights, all those kind of scenarios. So it's definitely got a user base that really want a first officer, and who are mainly catered for at the moment by First Officer Next and First Officer Pro. So yes, I think it's generally objectively a good feature for TFM to have. Now the next question logically would be, is it an important enough feature right now that we have to push the 747 development cycle back? And that's kind of what we're going to explore. So let's touch on what they say about first officer and kind of their reasoning for this. So they talk about how they made recommendations to first officer and that they haven't been implemented. So the first question is, does first officer need, and when I say first officer now, I'm talking about the add-on, so Pro and Next. Do they need accessibility improvements? Well, of course they do. Next, has this button system that was implemented where you go into the menu and you go to buttons and you choose which button you want and you click on it. It's a little bit weird. First Officer Pro has some more buttons labeled, but again, even in the briefing and options dialogues, we could do with some more labels. So we've established that accessibility improvements are needed. So they talk about their recommendations not being implemented. Obviously, I don't know the full list of their recommendations, and it won't just be TFM. Other people have spoken to the guy as well. Another question we could ask ourselves is, has First Officer been making any improvements here? Has any changes been made? Well, yes, for Next, he implemented that button system in the menu where you go to the menu with Alt and you go down to buttons and then you choose which button you want to hit, and that was his kind of workaround. Because before that, we couldn't accurately click on a lot of buttons. I mean, people were using golden cursor profiles. So has there been accessibility improvements per se? Yes. Are they kind of the improvements that we would want? Well, perhaps not. I mean, it is a little bit cumbersome. There are definitely things that could be better. Now, before we go on, I think it's worth highlighting the respect and kudos that we got to give to Matt King, the developer of First Officer here. It's easy to bash him and bash his software. That's always easy to do when there's accessibility improvements that could be made. But ultimately, what we've got to remember is that we wouldn't have been flying a lot of the aircraft that we've been flying without his software for the past few years. Even now, he's really propping us up in the 747 and 777. The 737, of course, TFM now has all the panels, so you can fly it yourself if you really want to. But I know a lot of people who still use it in the 737 at times as well, myself included. So it's a great piece of software. Whilst there are accessibility improvements that could be made, it's certainly usable. Yeah, it's been a mainstay of the community, and this is a guy who is not visually impaired himself. who has experienced probably quite a steep learning curve, didn't know anything about our community till we contacted him back when we found First Officer Professional, and has had to kind of come to terms with that. And so sure, there's things that we perhaps would want him to do differently or faster or whatever, but he's been doing his best. I think so. I just want to highlight before we kind of go on that we need to give him the respect that he deserves, and his same with his software. So they talk about kind of the recommendations not being implemented. I'd say that's probably a fair point. Probably not been implemented in the way that they expected it to be. And then they go on to say that nor will they be implemented, as in that they won't be implemented in the future. That is a little bit more difficult for us to kind of get our heads around, maybe, or fully agree with, I would say, for me anyway. Just because if someone says in an email, I'm not going to make any more accessibility changes, or if they come and say, yeah, I'm going to make all these great changes, blah, 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 it's all hearsay, and the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. I make my decisions based on what looks like it's happening in terms of what I can actually see. Can I see progress? And what has already happened, as in updates that have been released. There is a lot in this community of hearsay where people say, oh, this is great, something's going to happen. I've been told through the grapevine that so-and-so said this and blah, blah. I don't care. I'm not interested. Okay, it's sure, it might be nice to know, but unless it's actually proven that it's happening or has happened, there's a lot of things that have been said that have been absolute utter rubbish. So I'm sorry to put it that way, but so is it true that he's not going to make further accessibility changes or implement recommendations? I have no idea. Maybe he will, maybe he won't. Look, I mean, things change, just because he said 6 months ago he wouldn't, that doesn't mean that he won't do it in the future. But ultimately, yes, there is a problem there that it's not as easy for us as visually impaired people necessarily to translate recommendations and what we want into something that he can understand, because it does involve more work for him in terms of actually figuring out what we're talking about, and maybe using some kind of screen reader, whether it be NVDA, just to test things out before he releases them. So is it a problem? I mean, it's not a showstopper at the moment. First off, there's no usable. Could it become a showstopper? Well, in theory it could. If they release an update that is not usable, it could become a bigger problem. So they give three main reasons here. One of them being accessibility is an unknown in future First Officer updates. I actually agree with that one, to be honest with you. Yeah, I think as I said, there's a lot of hearsay, people saying, well, I've spoken with Matt and he said this and he said that. Well, that's great. Where's the proof? He says he's going to do something, or he says he's not. That is what it is. Until I see an update released or something, then I don't know. So yes, it is an unknown. I mean, you could say that about any of the add-ons we use, to be honest with you, or any of the simulators that we use. They could release an update and suddenly they're not accessible. But TFM has the ability to control this. It has the ability to remedy this potential problem. And give people another option. And I'm what I'm like. I love choice. I love having multiple options. So I don't think it's a bad thing at all. It appears that First Officer Pro and Next is expanding into other things, straying away from a First Officer add-on. Again, I can't dispute that, to be honest with you. Yes, Next is certainly. It's expanding into more of a PAX add-on. It's integrating with GSX. It's adding a lot more Copilot functionality and some of these briefings and things that it's adding. Yeah, I mean, that's true. Do I think that's a bad thing? No, not necessarily. I think it's in many ways a good thing. I mean, right now you can partly use GSX through First Officer, that you can't use it through accessibility because it uses an inaccessible part of Microsoft Flight Simulator. So do I think it's a bad thing? Well, no. You could make the argument that, well, he's expanding into all these other things, and so maybe he's going to have less time for accessibility. I think that would be a valid argument to make, potentially. So, there's that. Ultimately, it is expanding, but I don't think that's as relevant to the previous point is pretty relevant, that we can't guarantee whether it'll be accessible or not. He might say it will be, but we don't know. First officer seems to get progressively more difficult to understand and use. I think that's quite a broad statement, and I don't really know what metric we're judging it by. Are we judging it by accessibility? Are we judging it by features? I think that's very subjective. Some users might say, okay, first officer's trying to do too much and I don't like it. Some people might say, yeah, I really like that it's all integrated, and I can board passengers and use GSX all in this one thing. That's great. So I think it's quite a subjective thing. But I think that the most important takeaway is accessibility is an unknown in future first officer updates. So clearly from a TFM's perspective, they've given some recommendations. They haven't been implemented yet and may not be implemented in the future, which I think is a fair assumption. It is an assumption and we don't know for sure. And again, we got to have respect for Matt King, and so there's good reasons why he might be finding it difficult, and he may well come out with an update with enhanced accessibility, maybe something he's working on, and if it is, then we can only take our hats off to him. But I don't think it's a bad thing that TFM's coming up with first officer features as well. So they talk about no timeline given for this feature, and they mentioned that the navlog, obviously, which is the latest thing on the SimBrief support, but then obviously the expanding SimBrief support so that we can actually have the FMC programmed automatically eventually, and all those kind of good things. So SimBrief has also been pushed up to the top along with first officer. So ultimately, I don't really have a problem with it. I think we just got to be careful not to bash first officer too much, but I think I don't have a problem with it. I also think what we got to remember is that TFM does now have the 747 MCP boxes. I know we want all the panels as well, of course we do. But the MCP boxes were a real thing about the 747 that a lot of people found made it difficult to fly because you had to use that MCP panel rather than the boxes. Now we've got those, I'm not so fussed, to be honest, personally, about the 747 panels. I do want them, of course we want them. But if they'd done this and not given us the MCP boxes, I might have said, we could have done with those, but TFM's given us those boxes, so ultimately, they've taken care of one of the most troublesome parts of the 747 before jumping over to something else for a little bit. So, ultimately, you can have your opinions, but it's TFM's, Andy and Jason's decision. It's their program. They can work on what they want. If you don't like it, go and use something else. Make your opinions known. But at the end of the day, it is what it is. It's their program, and I think one of the great things is we've now got reasoning and transparency behind it, right? I mean, this is why they do the blog post, so that even if you don't agree with their reasoning, you can understand where they're coming from. And in this case, I think their reasoning is pretty solid, to be honest with you. They talk about Flight Sim Expo, which is, of course, from the 23rd to the 25th of June in Houston, and that they will be presenting. Which makes sense, obviously, for TFM, and giving a presentation, and should be a lot of fun for anyone who's able to attend. We have VATSIM CTP airports run out. So for some reason, VATSIM CTP go across the pond, kind of the way they organise this. They insist on using these forum posts, which are fine, but they also have a website which has an update section, which would be super easy if they put things in that update section, but guess what, they don't. So you kind of have to look around for this info. It's on a forum post that they posted on their Twitter that you can get a link to. It's also on their Discord. So I don't know why they don't just use the blooming website that they have dedicated for it. It'd be a lot easier, but there you go. So this will be on the 1st of April, and what they've done is they've announced the departure and arrival airports after the voting. So departure airports, you've got Amsterdam, London, Gatwick, East Midlands, love East Midlands, my home airport obviously, Paris, Charles de Gaulle, Dublin, Copenhagen, Istanbul, Hamburg, Vienna, Madrid, Cape Town, Lagos, I believe that is, and then arrivals, you've got Boston, JFK, Toronto, Chicago O'Hare, St. Martin, Vancouver, that's going to be a long one, blooming heck, Atlanta, Bogota, I think Buenos Aires, Sao Paulo, I think, somewhere else in Brazil. I don't know what that code is. And there's also a rough timeline here. So airport announcements will be the second half of February. That's already happened. Opening of the lottery sign up will be the first week of March. A pilot webinar in the first week of March. Some help as well for Oceanics. Pilot bookings will become available 2 weeks before the event, so middle to end of March. Slot confirmation window first half of the week before the event, and then the 1st of April is the event itself. So that's the rough timeline. I should also point out VATSIM 24 hours event. The slot booking phase has pretty much gone, but if you did book a slot, you will get an email today probably to ask you to confirm that slot. And also, if you don't confirm it, it will get released. So if you are looking to join the VATSIM 24 hours event, you can read more about it, or indeed go and maybe grab a slot that got released by someone because they didn't confirm it over the next few days, and that will take place on Saturday. There's some pretty interesting flights, and I talked about it more in my previous week's video. So that's going to do it. Leave your thoughts in the comments if you have any. I'm always more than happy to chat and share different opinions. And until next week, have a great week, and I will see you in March.